Welcome back to the Original Gangsters podcast. I am your host, Scott Burnstein, along with my partner in crime, the Doctor, Jimmy Buccellato.
Hi, everyone.
Hey now. And we are very thankful for our new producer, Ben. And Ben is behind the glass, and we couldn't be doing this without him, taking OG podcast to a whole other level on YouTube now, and we're going to be on a lot of different social media accounts and getting this thing multi-dimensional.
Yeah, by the time you hear this episode, there should be 3, 4, 5 episodes, hopefully, on YouTube, video episodes.
So today it's just going to be me and Jimmy chopping up some organized crime history. And we're going to do a little bit of a deep dive into the Lucchese crime family out of New York City. We're going to discuss the most infamous hotel heist in American history, possibly world history. It's the 50-year anniversary of the Pierre Hotel robbery, which took place in 1972. And then we're going to draw a line between the Pierre heist all the way to the very end of the movie Goodfellas, which is, an American classic, cinematic masterpiece. I call it the perfect movie. And I think there's a bit of lost history when it comes to the story, or the real story behind the movie Goodfellas. And, people have spoken and chronicled the Lufthansa Heist, which was the biggest robbery in American history, anywhere between $4 and $8 million in cash and jewels from JFK Airport in December 1978, and it's depicted in the movie. But and again, there's been dozens of documentaries over the years about the real story behind the Lufthansa heist. But the very end of Goodfellas, that chaotic 25, 30 minutes, the final chapter of the movie where he's all coked out of his mind, and you see him finally get arrested, and there's this a tiny line or two that gives you insight, but outside of that, the public, I should say, doesn't really know how the entire Goodfellas crew, quote unquote, was dismantled. And you have a reference by Henry Hill, or Ray Liotta playing Henry Hill, in the end of the movie when he gets arrested. And I thought these guys were feds, but in reality, they were Nassau County narco detectives. So he got brought down on a state drug charge, which then dominoed to him cooperating and taking down Jimmy the Gent and taking down Paulie Vario. But I want to tell people the real story about how that bust came to fruition, and the fact that the catalyst for the downfall of the Jimmy the Gent, Robert's Lounge gang, the Lucchese Goodfellas crew can all be tied back to an 18-year-old teenager. And you can, like I said, you can draw a line between the Pierre robbery and that 18-year-old teenager. That 18-year-old teenager, his dad was a member of the Goodfellas crew. I call them the Goodfellas crew. They weren't known as that at the time. They were the Robert's Lounge crew, Robert's Lounge crew, or the Vario crew. But this 18-year-old's father, Bobby Jermaine, was a member of that crew and was a participant in the Pierre Hotel heist.
Do you want to start with the heist?
Well, yeah. So it's 50 years ago this year. It was the day after New Year's, and a robbery crew that belonged to the Lucchese family, that was led by a Middle Eastern mob figure known as Sammy the Arab. His real name was Soterio Nalo, but went by Sammy, or Sammy the Arab. He actually came from Detroit. He was an Iraqi that was a young, up-and-coming Middle Eastern wise guy in the Detroit Mafia in the 50s. And in the early 1960s, he moved to New York and joined up with the Lucchese crime family. I'm not sure if it was an official arrangement or not, but
do we know how he ended up there?
I do not know. But he transferred, for all intents and purposes, from the Detroit mob, the Tokozerli crime family, to the Lucchese's, and was slotted into the crew of Christopher Furnari, who went by the nickname Christy Tick. And Christy Tick was Tony Ducks Corallo, who was the Godfather. That was his consigliere. And he was also the mentor for Little Vicamuso, who is the current godfather of the Lucchese crime family, has led the family for the last 30 years. He was groomed out of a Diker Heights bar that was owned by Christy Tick. And this was Christy Tick's, or this was a subunit of the Christy Tick Furnari Brooklyn crew that were specialized in high-end robberies. I mean, I guess you would, to make an analogy to people, movie-wise or pop culture-wise, I would say think of the Robert De Niro robbery crew in Heat, not so much in Goodfellas.
Yeah, these were pros.
Yeah. These guys, they took down scores for a living, and it wasn't necessarily smash and grab or run into a convenience store with a ski mask. These were very complicated heists that took a lot of planning and a lot of logistics and coordination. And they had gotten a tip about safety deposit boxes that were being held in a very I should say a loose, not a very, the safety deposit boxes that were in the Pierre hotel that were being maintenance by the hotel, but they belonged to the high-end clientele of the hotel. Word had trickled down to the Lucchese's robbery unit ran by Sammy the Arab that these were not very secure. That it was an easy access if you knew what you were doing to these safety deposit boxes.
The Pierre is in Manhattan, I'm assuming.
The Pierre is one of the ritzy hotels on Central Park.
Is it still there?
I believe it's still there.
Hmm.
And it's been famous for celebrities and political dignitaries and artists and the manor born. If you want to talk about mob history at the Pierre, besides just the heist in 1972, there was the famous wedding that was held there in, I believe, 1980. It was a Bonanno crime family wedding, and there were dignitaries, mob dignitaries from around the country that descended on the Pierre Hotel.
Class. Some of those FBI images are classic.
With the three capos from the Bonanno crime family who ended up being killed in the Donnie Brasco hit.
Rizzuto.
You had Vito Rizzuto in those. You have Vinny Gorgeous Basciano,
right,
who was the boss of the Bonannos, who's now in prison, who was like 18 or 19 years old in those photos.
Yeah, Bonventre and Amato.
Yeah, Cesare Bonventre.
There are guys from Sicily.
So all those famous photos that are online of that wedding, those took place at the Pierre Hotel.
Yeah, okay. I didn't remember that. That's
and that
cool.
was 10 years after the robbery that took place there in 1972. So
I'm surprised they let those wise guys book a wedding.
Yeah.
They didn't learn
knowing
lesson.
the history. Yeah.
I'm gonna check the silver.
So I guess Sammy the Arab's crew, in addition to being infamous for these high-end robbery jobs, they had a specific niche of ripping off ritzy hotels. So they had taken down scores at the Carlisle, the Regency, the St. Regis, the Drake, and the Sherry Netherland in the previous couple of years. They had actually stolen $1 million from Sophia Loren.
I saw that in your
at the Sherry Netherland the year before the year before the Pierre Hotel robbery. And Sammy the Arab was partnered up with Rochester, New York mobster named Bobby Comfort. That wasn't his nickname. That was his real name. And Bobby Comfort and Sammy the Arab were the co-leaders of this crew, and they reported to Christy Tick, and Christy Tick provided them men. He provided them workers.
Yeah, I understand. Other crew members.
So like members of Christy Tick's crew would go work for Sammy the Arab and Bobby Comfort as kind of like being farmed out for these.
Let me ask you something. Just maybe you don't know the answer, but these are some prestigious hotels. How public were these? How publicized were these robberies? Any idea? Did they
the Pierre Hotel robbery was very publicized.
No, I mean before that though. Some of these other ones,
I don't know.
Drake and
I'm not certain,
because I can imagine those high-end hotels would try to keep this on the down low, because you ain't gonna have a lot of high-end clientele for very long if people find out that they're gonna store their shit there. Somebody on the inside is tipping, some crooks off. So I was just curious. But anyhow,
so they planned it for the hours after the New Year's Eve party or New Year's Day party. So there was, they busted into the hotel at about 4:00 in the morning and stayed till about 6. They had 2 hours. They rounded up all of the staff and tied them up, put them into, I believe, the concierge's quarters. And they knew exactly what they were looking for. So they went into the safety deposit box section of the vault. And, well, let's back up 1 second. They were able to get access by just simply making a reservation at the hotel and showing up in a limousine, pretending to be guests from out of town, saying that they had to do an early check-in. I guess their check-in wasn't supposed to be till 10:00 in the morning, but they had called ahead to the desk and said, our plane got in early, so we're going to be checking in at about 3:00, 4:00 in the morning.
Like Ocean's 11,
right?
Kind of.
And so they were let in, just driving a limousine, not knowing that in the back of that limousine were a bunch of masked gunmen about to loot the place. So I take it back. I'm looking through my notes. They were there for about 3 hours, and the get or the haul has been speculated anywhere between $3 million and $30 million. I guess I'm guessing it's not $30 million, but I do believe it could be over $3 million in terms of cash and jewels and bonds and whatnot. And then another kind of tidbit from the crime that kind of speaks to the dashing, daring aura that these guys had. They tipped all of the hostages a $20 bill, which the equivalent today would be like $50 bill or $100 bill.
It's like reminds you of like a John Dillinger, Pretty Boy Floyd kind of Robin Hood kind of thing.
So, they eventually, or I shouldn't say they, Sammy the Arab was eventually arrested. Bobby Comfort was eventually arrested. They both did short prison terms. But the money was never really recovered. None of the mob shot callers that were benefiting from the robbery were ever brought to justice or indicted or had to account for this. And it's interesting how they got caught because it ties back to our hometown here in Detroit. So Sammy the Arab was felt comfortable enough to take his portion of the robbery and stash it, or stash portions of it. He stashed portions of his portion with Italian and Middle Eastern mob affiliates in Detroit. And one of those affiliates was a confidential informant and gave Sammy the Arab up.
I thought Sammy was holding back.
Well,
that Christy Tick wanted.
That's another
a bigger cut.
That's another aspect.
She was hiding it from Christy Tick.
Well, no, that's what came out, I think, after the fact.
Okay.
After he was caught, And then he came out of prison. I think he only did 2 or 3 years.
Let me see.
And then when he came out of prison, Christy Dick was like, all right, now it's time to settle up.
Okay. I see my time.
And Sammy was like, no, you got what you got, and I got what I got, and now we're moving forward. And that never sat well with Christy Tick or the Lucchese crime family. And, I'm of the belief, and I believe the U.S. prosecutor's office is of the belief that played a role in Sammy the Arab's gangland slaying in the late 80s.
Let me ask you something about protocol. If Sammy has this big score in New York and it's connected to some guys, mafiosi in New York, and he wants to stash that cash in Detroit or launder it with some connected guys, whether they're Italian or Middle Eastern, either way they're connected. They don't ask him where this money comes from, right? Like that's.
You see that Sammy the Arab, to me, learning about him more recently, I had known bits and pieces about him. I didn't know he was from Detroit until I was having lunch with some people that knew him in the last 6 months. And I knew that there had been a Middle Eastern mobster connected to the Lucchese's who had been killed. I read about that. So I knew the name Sammy the Arab. I didn't know his name was Sam Nalo. But I had no idea that he had grown up in Detroit and that a lot of people from Detroit that are alive today have memories and connections to him. So that made me kind of want to deep dive this. And so I'm still learning. I'm kind of in terms of my research, there are people that I've been researching and writing and reporting about for 20 years. And then there's someone like Sammy Nalo who I've been writing and researching about for a couple months. And I'm still learning as I go. But I'm wondering the same things that you're asking. I'm wondering what was going on behind the scenes there. When he did come back to Detroit with that money and jewelry and money, did the Detroit guys know that? Did they know that it had come from the Pierre Hotel? Do they know that he was involved with the Lucchese's in this? They think it was just some independent, Sammy ripped off someone without the help of another mafia family and were helping him? Or did they know they were helping him hide money from the Lucchese's?
And let me see what you think about this. If a lot of the Middle Eastern guys in Detroit were connected to the Giacalones. I don't know if Sammy was, but it seems like most of those guys were, as opposed to like the Tocos or Corrados or something. So if the Giacalones find out that you're coming back with a stash of money, they're either going to want a chunk or they're going to whack you and take it themselves, right?
Yeah. So
they're pretty dangerous, treacherous dudes like that.
The Giacalone brothers oversaw all the Jewish, African American, and Middle Eastern criminals for the Italian mafia in Detroit. So, and they were known to be quite assertive in their management style.
Right.
So
they wouldn't do this for free.
Yeah. And I sense that the person that he gave this to was a member of the Giacalone crew.
It would make sense.
Whether he be Middle Eastern or Italian. This was in 1972. So, that was right in the wheelhouse of that era where the Giacalones were overseeing all of these different kind of this melting pot of ethnic criminality.
Greek guys.
Right, Greek guys too.
Yeah.
But, the Greeks went more through the Corrado, Vitali.
That's a good point, because that was downtown.
Yeah. But they were definitely overseeing the Middle Eastern gangsters, which didn't just come from Iraq, for people that aren't from Detroit. It's a hodgepodge here of Iraqi, Syrian, and Lebanese. And there have been, the Iraqis didn't come on the scene until the 70s. They all got here after Saddam took over in 68 in Baghdad. But the Syrian and the Lebanese had been here since Prohibition.
Yeah, there's Lebanese families here that go back almost as old as the Italians. Like came here to work in the auto industry, like the 1920s.
Yeah. So Jimmy Tamer, the Mace, I don't know how to pronounce their names. The Massou brothers, Mosey Joe Mesu and George Mesu.
There's like
Freddie Salem, obviously.
if people, I mean, maybe people don't care, but if you grew up around here, just like there's a lot of at this point non-ethnic Jewish Americans, non-ethnic Italian Americans. There are a lot of non-ethnic Lebanese Americans in this area.
Right.
Who, like their great grandparents came over.
You'd have no idea they have Lebanese culture
they don't speak
unless
Arabic,
they would tell
they
you.
don't, right.
Right.
Exactly.
Right.
So it's just kind of interesting how, people assimilation over time.
Yes. So, I mean, I want to know, and I don't know if it's possible. I'm guessing that if I dig long and hard enough, I want to know who he gave that money and who he gave that stash to.
100%. Yeah.
I don't, we know who, I shouldn't say we know all of them, but we know a lot of the confidential informants. After they died, they got outed as confidential informants. So, I'm going to do a little bit more digging and see if I can trace back the guy that gave them all up. But at the end of the day, they got a slap on the wrist for stealing, even if it's not 30 million, even if you're saying it's 3 million. I mean, if you're saying it's the low end of the estimation. In 1972, $3 million is a lot of money.
How do you explain that? The late sentencing, lenient. Do you think there's some double dealing going on there?
No, not necessarily. I think that there are, especially when it comes to the federal government, there's some real disproportional sentencing guidelines.
Yeah. This is in 72. This is
in the 70s.
Because if you think about it, if you think about the political history of it, the real tough on crime stuff starts with Nixon. Prior to that, there was a lot of lenient sentencing. That was more of like the kind of liberal, like rehabilitation. So there could have been something where maybe it wasn't corruption. It could have been just a soft judge.
Yeah.
That's what they felt
neither
was
of them did more than
justified.
They both did 3 or 4 years, and they were both out by the end of the decade. They were out and active in the New York Mafia in the late 70s. So, and that's when the acrimony started to build between Sammy the Arab and the Lucchese's over the fact that Christy Tick didn't feel like the Lucchese's got their fair share.
So if you do a cost-benefit analysis, let's say 3 to 30, let's split the difference. Let's say it's like 17 million. And the feds can't account for it, and you do 3 or 4 years in prison.
It's a pretty good deal. It's a pretty good deal.
It's a pretty good deal. I would say so.
So Sammy the Arab met his maker in 1988, and we can tie his murder actually into John Gotti, if we're trying to hit on some pop culture highlights. So, and there's still debate in some circles today, and actually in the last couple months in court filings, of who gave the order for Sammy the Arab's murder. The guy that the government has pinned the murder on, Spiro Valencius, Valencius.
Yeah, I've heard of that guy.
Was the Greek godfather of New York City, Astoria, Queens.
Was that what they used to call the Sixth Family in there? I know now people talk about the Rizzutos,
different people have referred to themselves as, yeah, but I think the Russians would also refer to themselves as
Albanians do, yeah.
But he controlled that area in Queens. He had a working relationship with the Lucchese's and the Gambinos. And, well, let me also tell everyone that Sammy the Arab was the owner of a incredibly popular nightclub in Manhattan, which also put him at the epicenter of a lot of New York City gangland culture, because you had all of the major bosses and capo regimes coming there to socialize. And it was called the Port Said, and it was a Middle Eastern themed nightclub with belly dancers and very lavish food spreads and lavish drink menu, and it was a place for like movers and shakers. And that's where, in his office at the Port Said, is where he planned the Pierre robbery along with a lot of other robberies. And at the Port Said is where he met Spiro Valencius. And I apologize to anyone that's Greek if I'm butchering Spiro's name. But Spiro was the godfather, the Greek godfather of New York City. He had a famous run-in with John Gotti, where I guess he was infringing on some of the Gambino gambling business interests and was rebuffing attempts to have him back off. And John Gotti, I guess, was caught. I shouldn't say I guess, was caught on a wire saying to Sammy the Bull, I believe, tell Spiro that me, John Gotti, will personally cut his fucking head off if he sever his fucking head if he doesn't do what we're telling him to do.
Yeah, that's a classic line conversation picked up on those surveillance.
And the result was that he did do what the John Gotti was telling him to do.
Yeah.
So Sammy the Arab was killed in 1988. He was killed in a phone booth at his travel agency, I believe, or on the phone at his travel agency. He was on the phone with Spiro. It was October 25th, 1988. And there were rumors that him and the Greeks were butting heads over gambling territory. And the government, while convicting Spiro of a racketeering, included the Samuel murder, which got him life in prison. He is now trying to get out of prison. He's in his late 80s and is of poor health. And in his court filings this past couple months, is claiming that he was wrongfully convicted of the Sammy the Arab murder, and that just wrong place, wrong time. And I believe it's both. So I believe he was a co-conspirator without question in Sammy the Arab murder, but I don't believe he gave the order. It doesn't matter. You deserve to do life in prison for a gangland homicide, period. He's claiming he didn't give the order. He's saying he knew nothing. I should say he's saying he knew nothing about it. I'm saying he didn't give the order, but he went along with the hit team and set Sammy the Arab up to be murdered. And we know that Sammy the Arab, in the minutes before he died, gave the responding police detectives that he believed that Spiro had set him up. And he actually gave the name of Baldy Mike Spinelli as the hitter.
He's a Lucchese guy?
And Baldy Mike Spinelli is a Lucchese crime family soldier known for coordinating murder contracts.
So this is 88. He gets clipped. And the Lucchese's, are they still, or Christie
Tick was, I believe, in prison at that point.
So what's Lucchese's beef with Sammy at this point by 88?
Well, some of it is residual.
Is it still
some of it's residual animosity from the ripoff that they felt that came in the aftermath.
And even if it's 16 years or whatever the math is, 16 years later, one thing we know that when you research organized crime, the animosity doesn't just bad
blood lasts.
Yeah, it can take a while before
decades in the mob. Yeah.
Right before. I mean, look at Montreal with the Violis and residual. So it can take, and Sicily too. It can take a long time before the other side gets their chance at.
We always talk about protocol. I don't believe someone like Spiro Valensis would have the authority to kill Sammy the Arab,
who's a big earner for the Italians,
right? Yeah. Without clearing it with the Lucchese.
That's a good point. Right.
And so, I mean, we know the hit was carried out by the Luccheses based on Sammy the Arab's own dying words.
And was he a made guy at that point, Spinelli?
Yes.
And so you can't, as a made guy, you can't do contract hits for non-Italians you can't freelance.
Right. So I believe the Luccheses told Spiro, you're having a problem with Sammy? Well, we have the same problem with Sammy, and we have problems dating back over a decade. Yeah. So you're going to help us set him up. You're going to call him and tell him, He needs to be at a certain place at a certain time. We're going to know where he is, and we're going to kill him with your help.
So back to the original informant. We don't know who that person is from the documentation yet.
No, it's just in all the court filings and records. It just says that Sammy Nalu returned to Detroit shortly after the robbery. Put a lot of his robbery proceeds.
Is it possible that he gave up information? That's why he got a light sentence?
Yeah, I mean, anything's possible.
Okay.
Bobby Comfort didn't end up being murdered.
Right.
He died of cancer in the 80s and, did a couple years, kept his mouth shut.
I'm just thinking, because that's another thing that'll get you killed real quick is,
Yeah.
when they find out or suspect you're cooperating.
But so there was Bobby C, who was Bobby Comfort, but then there was Bobby G, who was Bobby Jermaine. And now we're going to tie it into the movie Goodfellas. Well, also, I said to Jimmy off air, there's a reference to Christy Tick in Goodfellas. You have to really know the scorecard to dissect some of the dialogue. But if you know the players and you can kind of, pick apart certain name checks, that if you're just a regular viewer, you would have no idea of the significance.
Well, even the famous scene in the nightclub at the, there's Michael Francis.
Oh, Michael Francis.
Yeah. They name a bunch of guys
right.
in that scene.
So Bobby Jermaine Sr. belonged to Christy Tick's crew. Christy Tick gets a reference in Goodfellas in the scene where Paulie, played by Paul Sorvino, calls Henry over for a dinner or whatever, pulls him aside and says, you hear anything about that guy that went missing? He's referencing Billy Batts.
Yeah, it's a great scene.
Because he says that, they're Christie's asking everybody. He's like, Christie's asking everybody because the Gambinos are busting Christie's balls. Yeah. Something along those lines.
Yeah.
And if you know who Christie is, Christie is Christy Tick or Chris Fernari.
That's a great scene because Henry Hill's playing dumb and
right.
Paulie's like, you know what I'm talking about.
Right.
What does he say? Like, you heard about that guy?
Yeah. That guy, who did the thing, did that thing with that other guy. So Bobby Jermaine, though, at some point in the 70s, changes crews. So Bobby G was not Italian. I'm not sure what his ethnic bloodline is, but he went from Christy Tick Fernari's crew to the Roberts Lounge gang, which was ran by Jimmy the Gent Burke, played by Robert De Niro in the movie Goodfellas. And they all hung out in a Queens bar called Roberts Lounge. And Bobby Jermaine, just like Sammy Nalu, transferred. I use the word transfer. I mean, I know that it's probably a better term for it.
Yeah,
but
right. It's not formally.
Not right. So just like Bobby Nalu switched from the Detroit crime family to the Lucchese crime family in New York, within the Lucchese crime family, Bobby Jermaine switched from Christy Fernari's crew to Jimmy the Gent's crew. And if you remember the movie, at the very end, Henry Hill is going off the rails, not just with drugs, but they're shaving points with the Boston College basketball team. They're running guns back and forth from Pittsburgh. If you remember, there's a scene where he tries to take some silencers.
Oh yeah.
To Jimmy the Gent.
I think your brain is.
So stop with the drugs. You turn your brain into mush.
Yeah. What am I supposed to do?
What am I supposed to do with these? So that particular reference of the silencers and the guns, that was Bobby Jermaine's job for Henry Hill. He was involved in the drug stuff too, but a lot of the stuff was going through Pittsburgh, as referenced in the movie. They're going through Paul Mazie, the Perla brothers, and Nick the Blade Jeswali, who were the Pittsburgh mobsters that they were doing business with. And Bobby
is all of that in Wise Guy? I don't remember.
Yeah.
I haven't read that.
I just reread it for this research.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yes.
Because I read that book when I was in high school, and most of it went over my head. And then I read it again after all these years. I don't know, maybe like 7-8 years ago. But I've only read it twice. So I don't remember.
Yeah. So this is all I went back, and that was part of my research, was rereading Wise Guy. So Bobby Jermaine is doing business with Henry Hill, both drugs and guns. And through Bobby Jermaine working with Henry Hill, he introduces to Henry Hill in the mid-70s his 15-year-old, 16-year-old son, Bobby Jermaine Jr., who is a cross between a burnout stoner football player and wannabe mafia thug.
Well, it sounds like the guys I ran with in high school.
And he's this, long hair, kind of chunky, had played on his high school football team in Long Island, but had been kicked out of school. And by the time he was 16, 17, he'd gravitated hanging out with his dad and his dad's mob crew. And at some point in 78 or 79, he is recruited by Henry Hill to start being a drug mule. So I believe that conversation occurred when Henry Hill was having Bobby Jermaine Jr. come over to his house and do landscaping.
Yes, right, yeah.
And I believe Bobby Jermaine Jr. and his dad were both working for some chemical company at this time too, where they were stealing some of the chemicals and moving them on the black market, using them in their drug operations. And Bobby Jermaine Jr. agrees to start working as a mule for Henry Hill. He's going back and forth from Florida, moving marijuana and pills. And then he starts moving marijuana, quaaludes, and cocaine along Long Island to high school and college kids. And in maybe midsummer of 79 or early fall 79, he gets entangled with an undercover Nassau County narco.
Yeah.
And
he talks right away.
And flips. And this 19, it kind of reminds me a little bit of a line that was said in Casino, but you could apply it to what happened in Goodfellas for a part of the story that they didn't really show you on camera. But as the De Niro character is narrating Casino, and he's talking about the underboss of Kansas City talking on a wire and giving them all this information that they didn't think they were going to get. Like, they were looking for something totally different related to a murder.
Some God knows who.
Some nobody got killed.
Over God knows what.
Right. And all of a sudden, the underboss is telling them, unprompted in this wiretap, all these. So De Niro's character basically, he's like, in a nutshell, this guy sank the entire world.
Yeah.
So it's like this 19-year-old kid was the first domino to fall that brought down that entire faction of the Lucchese crime family. Oh. It takes down Henry Hill, who in turn takes down Jimmy the Jet, who in turn they take down Paulie Vario and the whole Vario.
Well, let me. So what this reminds me of is, first of all.
Oh, let me just add one more thing.
Go ahead.
And then Bobby Jermaine was killed. Bobby Jermaine Jr.
I want to get
not
to that.
Senior.
Right.
And it's another reference in the movie Goodfellas that if you're not paying attention, it goes over your head. But when Henry goes and meets Jimmy the Gent for the last time in that diner, and Jimmy the Gent starts telling him, I told you your whole life, stay off the phone. He picks up the stack of wiretaps, and then he says, there's a guy, that guy, he read you guys all out. He's talking about Bobby Jermaine Jr.
Yeah. And
he's like, would you have a problem going with Anthony, to take care of this?
Yeah.
And he's like, no, I wouldn't have a problem. And then he says, I know if I went on that.
Yeah, he wouldn't come back.
If I went on that hit, I wouldn't have come back alive.
Well, it's something that reminds me of is, so we know that it's a myth that the Italian mafia is not involved in narcotics trafficking. We've debunked that a million times. In fact, the Italians have been involved in large-scale narcotics trafficking, not just, some of these smaller examples. Nevertheless, in fairness, there are some there are some wise guys who would prefer not to deal in junk. That's true too.
But it has nothing to do with morals or ethics.
No, it's not. But that's precisely my point. It has to do with this.
Right.
This is what they're afraid of: is that there's too many weak links in the chain. Right. It has nothing to do with ethics or Joe. It's infamia, like in The Godfather. It has to do with the
easy boss.
Yeah,
that
that's
come
right.
with harsh sentences.
That's right. And you get a lot of weak links, like a 17-year-old kid who's going to give up everybody.
But there's a certain cold-blooded ruthlessness to me, at least, and I know that I'm picking and choosing here, and it's somewhat hypocritical, but they killed this 19-year-old kid. Like, they didn't kill the dad, they didn't kill Henry Hill, they killed Bobby Jr. And I'm not.
Well, they would have killed Henry probably at some point if they could get to
but
him.
I'm just like, wow. And I'm not saying that in the world that, the checks and balances in that world are murder. And that's what keeps everyone in line. I mean, he says that in the movie Goodfellas.
Right.
But I don't know. It seems like maybe an 18 or 19-year-old kid should get a pass. But I'm naive, I guess, when I say that.
Big boy enough to transport narcotics across state lines.
Yeah. So they killed him, and the guy who killed him was actually Angelo Seppi, who in the movie Goodfellas, it goes by Frankie Carbone. There was no real Frankie Carbone.
Yeah.
Frankie Carbone was actually Angelo Seppi.
Yeah.
And played by Frank Silvero, who was
he's great.
Janko in
of course.
Abbandando in The Godfather. And Angelo Seppi, just like Carbone in the movie, ends up dead himself. So Angelo Seppi killed Bobby Jermaine Jr., I think in 1980. I think it was like a week or two after the bust. And then Angelo Seppi was murdered, I think, in 84.
How do we know the details of it? Did they have to lure him, or was it broad daylight?
I know they killed him on a street.
So he wasn't in hiding yet. They got to him pretty easy.
I don't know. I'm not sure. But so the bus went down in August of 79. Was when Bobby Jermaine Jr. was caught by the undercover narcos. And then Jermaine Jr. was killed in Queens in June 19th, 1980. So it was like a month. The bus came down in May of 80, I think.
I'm surprised that they didn't just kill the old man too, just out of like, I'm not trying to say like, that's what I would do. We're not ruthless killers, but I'm just saying if we're going to play, like, try to get into the mindset of a ruthless gangster, it would be like in Back to Casino. Like they say, would he ever talk? No, the guy's a Marine. He's like, what does he say?
Tough as nails.
Yeah, but then what is the?
Why chance it?
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. Yeah. Like even if they thought he was a stand-up guy, these guys are ruthless. It's like, I mean, he's just an associate. Why not just 86 them both?
But I felt like when I learned about that recently, and I learned about that from deep diving Sammy the Arab. After this lunch, these innocuous comments that were made in a lunch that I was at in the last couple months about Sammy the Arab being from Detroit, me wanting to kind of learn more about him. It was the 50-year anniversary of the Pierre robbery. I wrote a story. That story got tremendous feedback. I was actually surprised that people would have cared about it, but it was actually one of the most trafficked things I've written all year. So I figured, you tie that into Goodfellas and a slice of the Goodfellas story that I didn't know, and I don't think a lot of people really know outside of those one or two references in the movie. But I kind of thought those were creative liberties. I mean, I knew that he had gotten nailed by local cops.
Right, yeah, I knew that too.
But the part about going, when he meets Jimmy the Gent in the diner and he tells him to go whack someone, I don't know why. In my head, I kind of thought that was a creative liberty, but it wasn't.
So in the film Goodfellas, they say that his babysitter got caught on a wiretap, right?
That part's true too.
Yeah.
I read that in the babysitter did get caught on a wire.
But that's separate from... She wasn't connected to this kid at all. He just had multiple mules.
Right.
Or at least more than one.
Yes.
Okay.
I could be wrong right now. Okay, so I'm 90% sure what I'm about to say is accurate. So give me a 10%.
Yeah. Right. We can get
10% leeway of being wrong. Yeah. I think if my memory serves, he was the guy that made the phone call.
I see. Bobby
Jr. was told not to make a phone call from a certain
So they mixed it. There was a babysitter, but the scenario was mixed with a different person, if that makes sense.
And I think Bobby Jr. might have been ignoring what he was told by Henry Hill because he was working for the government. Like at that point, he was already working for them. And when he was like, don't make the call from the house, not only is he ignoring him because in the movie it looks like, she just doesn't care.
Right.
But I think there might have been some intention behind that to help whoever he was working for.
That's classic cinema too. Forget your fucking hat. I never go anywhere without my hat.
Well, that's such a great scene also where he's like, for a second, I thought it was the mob and I was dead. And then I realized that mobsters don't talk like that. Only cops talk like that.
Yeah, right.
If it had been the mob, I wouldn't have heard anything.
Yeah, there's another classic line in there. Remember, you baking a cake?
No, that's so Bo Dietl, who's
dickhead.
is an actual NYPD detective, or was very decorated. I've met him a couple times. He's a character, but he's got some great lines in that movie. He's got some great lines in Wolf of Wall Street.
Yeah.
In that movie because he's the guy that puts the gun into his head, says, turn the engine out right now, you motherfucker. And that's when Henry's like, yeah, only cops talk like that.
Yeah,
and then as they're dragging him into the station, he's like, what, you guys baking a cake?
Yeah. No, it's classic line. So I had one of my gangs and organized crime class, my students have to do a film project. That's one of their assignments. And so usually at least one group picks Goodfellas. And some of my students were really disappointed. There's all females in this group. And that they thought Ray Liotta in the film, that he was very suave.
He was very likable.
Good looking dude.
Right.
And so they were, their terms, they were like, he was hot.
Right.
And then when they looked at a real picture of Henry Hill, they were really disappointed. And so what do you expect? You can't have a guy looks like Henry Hill in real life.
But that's part of why that was such a perfect movie. They took a character in real life, Henry Hill, who was not very likable.
No.
But you had, for the sake of the film,
of course,
because he's the through line through the whole movie.
Yeah.
You're riding in a car with this guy the whole movie.
Yeah.
You had to tread that line between likable to the audience, but still a gangster.
Yes.
And I thought they did that so perfectly because there was some relatability to him, but at the same time, he was also someone that did really bad things.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
But I know that I digress for a second here, but going back through Wise Guy, he does talk in Wise Guy like he does in the movie about wanting to save. In the movie, he's Maury. In real life, the guy was named Marty Krugman.
Right.
Marty the Rug, Maury
those
the
are
wig
great
guy.
scenes too.
And so in one sense, it's like he's doing whatever he can to protect this guy.
Yeah.
It didn't matter. He got killed anyway. You gonna tell Jimmy that he doesn't?
Yeah. What am I?
Jimmy's being an unconscionable ball buster.
Fuck him in his ear.
Fuck him in his other ear. I didn't agree with 8% behind the above the big.
They start strangling him with the phone.
Yeah. You got enough. Well, that part was true. Where he's like, so Jimmy, this was in the Wise Guy book. Henry Hill and Nick Pileggi say Jimmy was an insomniac. Jimmy couldn't sleep at night, and those wig commercials would run in the middle of the night.
Yeah.
So Jimmy would be couldn't be sleeping, couldn't sleep. He's in front of his television, and he has a guy that owes him money on the television. He's like, you got enough money for those fucking commercials? You don't got enough money to pay me what you owe me.
Right.
So I think that he was just likable enough. And then you add in the fact that Ray Liotta was good looking, and there was a certain suave, smooth criminal character to the way Ray Liotta played it. I don't think Henry Hill was really that smooth. Henry Hill benefited. No. This is a rule of thumb, in my opinion. You can apply in so many different realms of life. And it plays to the whole, it's not what you know, it's who you know. Proximity to power can be incredibly valuable and can be a currency that you can ride for forever.
100%.
or at least forever. You know. So Henry Hill, he was brought up by Paul Vario. And then when he was a young adult, he was mentored by Jimmy Burke. Yeah. As long as those two guys are co-signing for you, you can do whatever you want.
Yeah. Yeah, he might not have gotten as far as he did without those guys. And by the way, my understanding is that Vario was a hypocrite too, because that his son was a big junk dealer.
Yeah. Well, and another part
by junk dealer, I mean heroin dealer,
yeah.
not like literally like Sanford and Son.
And then a part that they don't tell you because it just would have made things more complicated and confusing. But in reality, Paulie Vario was sleeping with Karen.
Oh.
Karen, the Lorraine Bracco character, was having an affair on Henry with his boss.
Okay, I don't remember that. Is that in Wise Guy?
Yeah.
God, I don't remember.
And then Tommy, one of the reasons Tommy got killed, yes, it was the fact that he killed Billy Batts and he killed this other guy named Foxy who were close to the Gotti crew and the Gambinos. Yes, that was true. But what eventually gave Paulie the impetus to okay the contract was that Tommy had tried to sleep with Karen.
Oh, shit.
And Paulie was like, okay, you put your hands on my girlfriend. It wasn't you put your hands on Henry's wife.
This is Guma.
Right.
Or his paramour or whatever.
So that, from my research, is what led to Paulie saying, telling the Gambinos it was okay to kill Tommy. And that incident had happened around the Lufthansa. And if you remember in the movie, Henry wasn't really involved in Lufthansa.
No.
Henry,
I mean, so that's one of the reasons why he doesn't get clipped.
Right. So Henry was off running around doing all these other scams. And that's why he probably was leaving town to go to Pittsburgh a lot. And Karen was left to her own devices.
Yeah, I mean, in the film, he just...
Don't give me the Babe in the Room. Don't give me the Babe in the Woods routine, Karen. I've heard those tapes.
Yeah.
You're on those tapes talking about cocaine.
Yeah. That's another good scene. But yeah, in the film, he just introduces the guy, the security guy, to Jimmy. But other than that, he's not really involved in a lot of the, day-to-day planning and operations of it, carrying it out. All right, well, this is really fun, and I think I hope people enjoy this, and I know our listeners like these kinds of movies. Just want to remind everyone, please follow us on social media, on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, at Gangster Podcast. We're on TikTok. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel. These videos will be up soon. And stay in touch with us. Let us know what you want to listen to, kinds of topics. We get a lot of good feedback. People want more Outlaw Biker episodes. We're working on that. More episodes about Canada. We get a lot of good suggestions. People always love the Detroit stuff. So we appreciate your feedback and following us. Anything else you want to?
No, this has been great. We're really, we can't say enough about Ben, our new producer.
Yeah.
Like I said, he's helping us grow, helping us mature and become multidimensional. And we're really excited about what we got in store for you in the future and for ourselves with Ben. Ben is a superstar, just like Mark was. We loved Mark and we love Roberto. And hopefully
Roberto's actually in the building,
right.
But he's unable to jump in on.
Hopefully, we'll be hearing from both of them at some point in the future. Roberto probably a little bit more, but Ben is quarterbacking us now from behind the glass. And God, we've gotten you just like the Pistons just got a steal in the NBA draft.
So it seems like
maybe the best NBA draft of all of 2022. We've got a steal.
Yeah.
And Ben as our producer because this guy is a hidden gem.
Yeah. Well, thanks everyone for listening. We'll see you next time. I'm Jimmy Buccellato.
I'm Scott Burnstein. We'll talk. Out.